wish I could say it's my pleasure to rise in the House today to speak to this motion, but that would be misleading in this place. The circumstances that have led to the necessity of this opposition day motion completely efface the normally noble feelings I have to expect when standing in this House. The price of fuel has been increasing. This we all know. We can sit here and debate the macroeconomic reasons of how we got here. We can point fingers at various governments, regulatory bodies, international associations, etc. But what would that do? What would pointing the finger at government agencies do for the business owners that I spoke to during question period during our last sit-in week? The reality of the situation is that no amount of bickering in this place about past governments will lower the out-of-control fuel bills Canadians are being stuck with. People from all ages and stages are grappling with these costs. Their budget doesn't have room for the increase when paying the minimum payment on their exhausted credit card is their primary concern. Bickering about OPEC or allegations of corporate greed among oil and gas companies does nothing to help the young couple from Sterling I spoke to earlier today, or the retiree from Bath last week, or the gentleman from Tamworth that emailed me this morning begging for relief. Empty words and pitful rhetoric from wordy politicians gets old and it won't help. Madam Speaker, this motion will. And this is why it is critical that we can pass this motion today and do so unanimously so that we can all go back to our constituents and say, we did this. We did this together. We set aside any professional grudges we held. We set aside our pride. We set aside our loyalty to our party, and we delivered financial reprieve to those suffering from these ridiculous fuel prices. Madam Speaker, I think it is no surprise at all that those in this House that are lucky enough to represent the more rural ridings in Canada feel particularly strong about this issue. Now, to be clear, to my more urbanite colleagues in all parties, I do not mean to minimize the effect that these fuel prices have had on your constituents. I know they suffer too. But the simple reality is that the people in rural Canada, like those in Hastings, Lennox, and Addington, rely more on fuel than lobbyists in downtown Toronto or bureaucrats here in Ottawa. There is no city bus from El Dorado to Enterprise. There is no LRT from Bancroft to North Thurlow. If you do not live within walking distance of your work, and the vast majority of my voters, constituents, human beings do not, you need to drive a car. And believe you me, when I say driving around HL&A, Hastings, Lennox, and Addington, requires a lot of gasoline, there's a lot of driving. Madam Speaker, our farmers, who have often invested millions of dollars into their machinery, do not have the option to use some tax credit to convert their fleet to electric. Nor do our haulers, or our foresters, or any small business owners reliant on any type of machinery. Another point that I believe often gets left out is that of home heating. As a senior living on a fixed income, I spoke to, this particular gentleman was later last week. It was a rural community in Marmora. They simply cannot switch over to a more cost-effective heating option. Not only because it's cost prohibitive, but because in many instances like his, the infrastructure just didn't exist. Madam Speaker, these are good people. Many of these people have been raised to work hard and play harder. These people have paid their taxes, volunteered in our communities, coached sport teams, baked for school fun fairs, and church bazaars. These are Canadians who rely on their vehicles to get to work and their children to activities. These are Canadians and nonprofits who depend on their vehicles to keep serving their community. They need reprieve yesterday. They do not deserve to suffer under paralyzingly high fuel prices. Something needs to be done. And today, something can be done. Today, we can call on the government to pause the GST on fuel and give Canadians a break. This would immediately reduce prices at the pump by about 8 cents a litre. I recognize this does not solve the problem, but it helps. The reality is, Madam Speaker, 53% of Canadians cannot keep up with rising costs. Higher fuel prices raise the cost of everything. It's not just a ripple effect anymore, it's a tidal wave, and Canadians are feeling it across this country. Madam Speaker, I urge the members of this place. The official opposition has before you a realistic, tangible, and direct solution to Canadians suffering from high prices. To date, this legislature's reaction to those gas price increases have been completely inadequate. A vote against this motion is a vote for the status quo. It's a vote against the low-income senior who is forced to choose between heating or meals. It's a vote against the single parent of 4 kids struggling to make ends meet. It's against the farmer who grows our cities their food. It's a vote against the struggling student working 3 service jobs through town to get through school. Madam Speaker, this is a good motion. This motion will help all of our constituents. An Opposition Day motion should not automatically elicit a paroxysm of partisan mania from other parties. Yet it happens far too often. While I'm not surprised, I'm extremely disappointed that the NDP have now formally signaled to the Liberals that they'll support whatever measures they need to prop up this minority parliament. Regardless of your political leaning, the option was not on the ballot. Madam Speaker, it's not democracy at its best. Today, I implore these members who vote against this motion to at least consider listening to your constituents crying out for help. If you have not already, ask your staff to read the emails that are being sent to you, listen to the messages that are being left on your phones, and I guarantee you they will have many, many instances to share with you. Try to understand their sleepless nights that these increases of prices are bringing. If you vote against this motion, at least think about how else you can ease the financial burden. The short-sighted economic policies from governments the world over has foisted over the backs of our seniors, our single parents, our Indigenous communities, our farmers, our rural Canadians, and act. Madam Speaker, this is what we were sent to this place to do, to act. If you must vote against this motion, be it from pressure from your whip or your leadership, then I pray that you will listen to the words of the members here and your constituents at home and use it to go back to your caucuses and create something more palatable for this parliament, because none of our constituents, especially those in our rural communities, can afford the indecisiveness and indifference that plagues politicians in Ottawa. The status quo is not acceptable. We owe them all, regardless of political affiliation, better. Thank you.
Questions and comments. Questions et commentaires. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government's House Leader.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. I find it quite interesting to listen to the members from across the way, and this member in particular, a neighbouring colleague of mine, referred to, making sure that we don't talk about this or provide empty rhetoric, I think were her words, specifically as it relates to the challenges that Canadians are going through and the reality of what they're facing. Yet a quick search and answer comes from this member, a question that she asked in this House on December the 16th, where she said, Mr. Speaker, while working Canadians struggle to make ends meet, the finance minister continues to mislead Canadians by arguing that our economy is strong. That may be the case for some, but for conversations around the kitchen tables in rural Canada tell a very different story. Bills are piling up and credit cards are maxed. Just inflation has brought Canadians to their breaking points financially. So I'm curious, Madam Speaker, when this member speaks of empty rhetoric, is she referring to just empty rhetoric from across the way, or is she referring to the comments that she herself made on December 16th during question period?
Honourable member for Hastings, Lennox and Addington.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for mentioning that. And in fact, it was pitful rhetoric that I made reference to earlier in the speech today. And I'm quite proud of the comments that were made. Canadians need to have representation to speak to the pressures that they're facing. And the prices in gasoline are intolerable, inflation is at an all-time high, and Canadians are exhausted from the rhetoric and they need action. They're not asking for too much.
Questions et commentaires, l'honorable député de Beauport.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Beauport-Limoilou. Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. You know, inflation can be caused in part by the fact that we depend so much on oil, and we should be reducing our dependence on oil. That said, we're living through a situation where people from all walks of life, seniors, students, as my colleague said, low-income people, and so on, are facing problems with the cost of living. And not just gas, but many things. One thing that's really expensive is housing. There's too much demand relative to supply. And one of the things that we could do, wouldn't my colleague agree, would be to invest in social affordable housing.
For Hastings, Lennox and Addington.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The issue of the day is how can we help Canadians? Madam Speaker, the cost of fuel has increased 32.3% in 1 year alone, and that is why we are here today presenting the opposition motion to provide relief for Canadians. And I will continue to be the voice of all Canadians looking for relief with regards to the spiraling cost of living.
Member for Skeena Buckley Valley.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to the member for Hastings, Lennox, and Addington for her remarks. Now, she made several points in her speech about the cost of home heating, and I agree very much that this is an issue that needs to be addressed, but I'm confused, and I'm confused, Madam Speaker, for two reasons. The first one is that just a couple of hours ago, the NDP brought forward an amendment to this motion that dealt specifically with the cost of home heating, and it was refused by the Conservative Party. So the first question is why, since it's obviously an issue that concerns her. The second issue is that the Conservative motion deals specifically with the cost of gasoline and diesel. And the member spoke about seniors forced to choose between heating and meals. Could perhaps my honorable colleague tell us how many seniors in her riding heat their homes with diesel or gasoline?
Member for Hastings, Lennox, Addington.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, here's the reality. Inflation is at an all-time high. It's the highest rate in this generation. Everything is going up. What we have to recognize is that this government is spending millions of dollars on things they could have cut. They've misplaced billions they can't account for. And sadly, this government has no financial accountability. People are struggling to make ends meet. This government has an opportunity right now, today, if they wanted to, perhaps had it been their idea, to do something right for Canadians. Thank you.
Reprise du débat, l'honorable.
Resuming debate. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister for, let's see, Diversity, Inclusion, and Diversity and Inclusion. Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I would add, and housing. I'm going to be sharing my time with the member for Halifax. Madam Speaker, the government is acutely aware